All right, I guess we got everybody. Now, plant physiology, we're already 5 minutes late, but I'll try not to run more than an hour and 5 minutes if possible. Uh, Plant physiology was always my nemesis until I had to teach it. And then it still is not my friend, but it's an important part of botany. It's an important subscience within botany, and we can't ignore it. And take a second, everybody, and read the first two bullets if you haven't already. And you should get a better, get the idea that we're trying to get across. In other words, it's almost pointless to take a plant physiology course or have a plant physiology portion of a botany class without knowing something about plant morphology and anatomy, and which we've just done that. So I feel a little better about doing what we're doing. We just had a crash course in plant morphology and plant anatomy. I say just, it kind of got interrupted. It's been a while, but it's not right on the heels like I'd like it to be. All right, now I was saying we just had a crash course in plant morphology and anatomy, and that's important to understand. Understanding how plants are put together is important to understanding how plants function. Okay, both physically and chemically. The third bullet ushers in the next slide. It's from an AP biology material, and it's got one arrow over here in the corner. I'm trying to get it. Whoops! It's not working. I'm gonna have to. There it is. Now, that arrow. Okay. All right. Now, this is trying to nutshell plant physiology, and it's kind of hard to do. Let's go to the next slide. We'll come back, but we're gonna get down to, let's see, translocation. We're gonna get down to 7B1, resource and nutrition uptake, and then we're not going to get transpiration today, so it'll be at least one, if not two more sessions. Now back to this slide. Tries to nutshell everything that's here, and that's kind of hard, but it's got the roots, the stem, and the leaf all going on at the same time. And one of the test questions I used to ask, or you could ask a student in plant physiology class, is trace the path of a water molecule from the soil all the way through the plant to the air, and name all the tissues that it interfaces with before it gets to the outside. Now that's almost a graduate level question. But anyway, that's how bad it can get in terms of that, because you'd have to say, well, it goes through the root hair, it gets into the root epidermis and the cortex, then the endodermis and the pericycle, then into the xylem of the root, and then the xylem of the stem. I might as well continue. Xylem of the stem all the way up to this part of the leaf, goes from the stem into the leaf and comes into this little, out of the xylem into this intracellular space. It's called the substomatal chamber, and then through the process of transpiration, which is like evaporation, except it's from within to without, the water leaves out. So I didn't intend to do that, but it wasn't that hard. It wasn't for me because I've done this so many times. But now, all right, here's the part about the xylem here. We're telling these AP people got it right. The xylem moves water and minerals up from the ground, from the roots throughout the plant. And xylem can be can function quite well dead. Now the xylem parenchyma is alive, but everything else, including especially the vessels that are made up of vessel elements, are dead. When wood is functionally dead when it works. It works for translocation of water, and it works for mechanical support. Two main functions of the xylem, especially the hard heartwood. All right, buddy, get back over and sit down. It's my dog. Anyhow, the phloem though works. They implying that the phloem works from the leaves down. That's not accurate. It works both ways. In fact, the phloem, you might remember, is made up of these sieve tubes, uh, and you could and and the sieve tubes are made up of sieve tube elements, just like the vessel's made up of vessel elements, little brick-like cells in a long tube. They have sieve plates between them, kind of like shower drains, look like shower drains, and stuff passes through them. Sometimes the sieve plates get blocked, but off to the side, and this is stretching your memory, I'm sure, there's a companion cell that off to the side in the sieve tube that controls things. It's kind of like the gate tender or the toll bridge handler. It so bottom line is phloem, in the inner bark of a tree functions only because it's alive. So, and you in the to get back to this X about going down in the spring when the sap rises, guess what happens? It comes out of the root system up into the stems, into the newly emerging leaves that come from the buds. So that's what the X is all about. The AP biology is supposed to be the better part of biology. Didn't get that. Didn't get that memo, I guess. Okay, I don't hear you laughing, but you're all muted. But anyhow, here we go. All right, this is this. If you try to tell somebody what's in plant physiology, this is what you would tell them. It's about metabolism, which involves, let me get this out of my way. You can't see it, but I can. Photosynthesis and respiration. And, well, actually, that's biochemistry, which is, ironically, I've never had biochemistry, but I've had organic chemistry. But yet, a good part of plant physiology is biochemistry. Chemistry is probably the stumbling block of a lot of the people that try to understand this. And it was for me too, in a way, because I had such poor chemistry teachers coming up. And they just, if they ever knew how to teach it, they lost the ability. But one guy was brilliant, but he couldn't teach. And he couldn't communicate it very well. But there is some memorization involved, and I hate that, and that's probably part of it. But anyway, another part of plant physiology is acquiring nutrients, nutrient resource uptake from the environment, and then moving it within the plant. And that involves transferation and translocation, which we'll talk about next time. Then this growth and development involves plant hormones quite a bit. And we'll talk about, actually, you already have some idea of what totipotency is. So that'll be kind of review. Hormones play a big part in growth and development. And then we'll talk about something that's these nastic movements. Let's see if I can let's see what I said about them. Well, anyway, these are reactions that plants have that are not growth movements. Okay, growth movements are responses, but different other responses that aren't growth movements are categorized as tropisms. And well, actually, tropisms could be growth, like gravitropism and phototropism. But nastic movements are movements associated not with growth and doesn't involve hormones. And then this last part is also part of it. But let me look over my notes here and see if I've covered everything, because I didn't look at them when I was started. So plant physiology simplified is making and using food. That's up here. Making, using, and that means burning it, respiration. Then it's about acquiring resources and translocating them. And then down here, we're responding to growth, to hormones, growth and development. And then the movement business is done at the same time. 7B, when you get to this nutrition, I did that last night, and it was a little bit boring. I hope it's not as boring for you as it was for me. But let's see. Okay, lastly at C, down at C, I'll go ahead and say this now. although it's an oversimplification, if the plant makes more food by photosynthesis than it burns in respiration, growth and development takes place. That makes sense, right? If you know, you have to have a gain in the food production if you're going to grow, and that makes sense. And plants like us respire. We have to have energy, and they have to have energy. Okay, sometimes, like in us, and me in particular, the excess is stored as fat, starch, and oil instead of being respired. Okay. All right, so that pretty well does it. Now let's, oh, I love this slide, not because I did it. In fact, that makes me think about something that I hesitate to mention because it's, some may find it humorous and some may find it offensive, but because it's going to make me sound narcissistic. And considering, well, our last president, I don't care if you like him or not, he was definitely that, still is. But I was thinking this week about teaching this stuff, and I kind of felt like Yoda on Star Wars, that I'm the last of the Jedi teaching something that's almost extinct, you know. And but anyway, it's a little like that because with that it's a make-believe thing, but it was kind of like an martial arts, and this is kind of like science, a part of science that's getting less and less obvious and less taught and thought about. Okay, now so much for that tangent. But all right, photosynthesis and respiration, two biggies in plant biochemistry. Energy is it stores energy in the form of what? We'll talk. The next slide will tell us it's a glucose molecule. If you burn that glucose molecule, it releases energy in the form of an ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is a high energy molecule. It's like a little stick of dynamite inside of a cell. All right, CO2 is involved in photosynthesis. This next slide, you should see it absorbs CO2 from the air. That cuts down on the greenhouse. It's a greenhouse gas, and so the more you can take it out of the air, the better off you are for that blanket that wraps the Earth's atmosphere, part of it. Respiration, unfortunately, like any burning process, releases carbon dioxide. Okay, I hope we're doing okay here. That's the bad part about all y'all. I don't even hear anybody laughing because your audio is off. That's all right. But anyhow, organisms, green plants and algae. Okay, green plants and algae do photosynthesis, and algae are believed to be the ancestors of plants. And all living things do some form of respiration. Some of them ferment, which is only a partial form of respiration. It's not the same. And actually in our muscles, we do lactic acid production, which is kind of like fermentation and that, and then cell types, the spongy mesophyll in the leaves, and sometimes in the stems, we have chlorophyll. Chlorenchyma would be a good term. Chlorenchyma, parenchyma has chlorophyll. And then all living cells potentially have the ability to respire. If oxygen's present, if it's not, then they go anaerobic, like the lactic acid production when you have an oxygen lag in humans. Food, okay, this is a biggie. Metabolism can be divided into two parts: a build-up process called anabolic metabolism, and then there's catabolic or tear-down metabolism, where you take polymers and make monomers out of them. Over here, you take monomers like glucose and put them together to make bigger molecules like starch. Even taking CO2 and water and putting them together is anabolic, building up, making a more complex molecule. So metabolism has anabolism and catabolism. These are the adjective forms as subsets. And nobody ever taught me that when I was trying to learn this. They just, I don't know why they didn't put that together, but it's pretty obvious. Biomass obviously increases, and then when you burn big polymers and make monomers out of them or break them down, you decrease the biomass, especially if you're burning fat and starch. And there's animal starch called glycogen. Plant starch is starch. But anyhow, photosynthesis, thank goodness for us, releases oxygen, and burning anything uses oxygen. In fact, if you don't have oxygen, you're not going to burn very well. You might remember that statement in the opening presentation. I said that if all of the plants and algae were removed from the earth, the oxygen production, that 20% of the atmosphere of this oxygen would be used up by the animals in about 11 years. So that's how important that oxygen is. Okay, now for a simplified version of photosynthesis, as we see here. Earlier in our discussion of the importance of plants, I tried to stress the importance of photosynthesis process, and I just did it again with that oxygen production. But the thing that needs re-stress, oh, what's this now? Running out of time. We removed the 40-minute time limit on your group meeting. Love it. Okay. Did you hear that? You see that? Good grief. All right. All right. So that answers the question, Steve. Yeah. Well, I've got to figure out, and this is for Susan's sake, we got to either figure out how to, anyway, that's another matter with the trillium thing. Well, all right. So, well, at least that's one unknown out of the way. I would hope that it would tie into my paid account, but apparently not. So maybe I can figure out a way around that. All right. I think there is a way. But anyway, all right. Now, the more this for the purist, well, for the purist, this is a balanced chemical equation that's the same. I'm not into balancing equations, but it's an art in itself, learning how to do that. But this is a balanced carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll will make a simple carbohydrate known as glucose. And a byproduct of the process is oxygen and water. And water is over in the end and it's over here in the beginning. Water is a medium that everything takes place in. You don't see it obvious up here, but it's here, or it should be. It's implicit. Now, the carbohydrates that we built here can be used for energy, burning and respiration, which we'll talk about momentarily, and for anabolic processes like building blocks for other chemical compounds, like what happens when you put two of these molecules together? You make, this is a monosaccharide. Two of them together would be a what? Disaccharide. Three or more would be a polysaccharide. And so you go from a monomer to a dimer to a polymer in that order. A polymer is the equivalent of a polysaccharide in carbohydrate language. In the case of proteins, amino acids are the monomers, and you build proteins by putting them together. So those are the building amino acids and this molecule are the building blocks for other chemical compounds like starch or cellulose, which are big polymers or polysaccharides. Cellulose is probably one of the most abundant organic compounds on the face of the earth. Not probably, it is. And then starch is also abundant. But let's see, I think that pretty well does it. Anybody want to unmute and ask a question? Now would be a good time to do that. All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Oh, okay, yeah. The CO2, the O2 can be used for respiration by the plant and the rest of the biological world. Okay, that's that. Okay, and they have to use their own oxygen, turn around and burn that molecule in respiration. So these two products of photosynthesis, the plant can turn around and use them. Now, if we ingest the plant, if we ingest that and its derivatives, we can use that 20% of the atmosphere to burn that oxygen. So we're consumers and they're producers that also consume what they produce. It's kind of interesting. I never quite said it quite that way, but I hope that didn't confuse you. All right, the photosynthesis is literally put together with light. That's a nutshell. Now, all right, this is one of my favorite topics. Why are plants green? All right, the answer has to do with absorbance and reflectance of light and transmission of light too. But within the, let's see. All right, here we go. Within the visible spectrum of white light, gets into physics, which is my real nemesis. Within the visible spectrum of white light, which wavelengths are the most active in photosynthesis? Well, some of you may already know, but all right. But when you do the prism bit, you break up light into its form. In fact, you've probably seen it in a garden hose in the sunlight. You get the prismatic effect the same way. All right. The answer to that question is borne out by this slide and the next slide. This next slide is a repeat of this, but it's just a slightly different view. But there's a prism breaking up the light. Now, Engelmann, back in 1882, he did a simple little experiment. This is kind of like a science fair project. I mean, it's kind of neat. But he took a filamentous alga, that's the singular of algae, that public just doesn't distinguish between singular and plural. The news media don't know any better either. But he took a simple Spirogyra algal filament and put it under a microscope. And he used the light of the microscope. I presume he wouldn't have to really use much else. He observed at high power magnification that the bacteria that are aerobic, oxygen-loving bacteria that are motile, the bacteria could have motile, they were congregate in the blue region of where the prism had broken up the light, in the red region. And they would not hang out much in the green and yellow regions. And that indicated that as far as photosynthesis is concerned, it must be most active in the blue and red portions of the visible light spectrum. And that's true. The next slide, okay, what kind of bacteria are congregating? You already see that. Okay, they're aerobic. That means they're oxygen using, and they're obviously motile or they wouldn't be able to get around. Why are these bacteria? Well, I've already answered that question. Okay, because they need oxygen and that's where they're going to get it. Same concept, same slide, a little bit more graphic value to it because it's got a graph over here with the ordinate, the y-axis relative photosynthesis going on, and down here the wavelengths of light to respond to. This previous slide and this one is what we call an action spectrum. Okay, an action spectrum tells us what wavelengths of light are the most effective in the process. And you can see that it's in the violet, the blue, and the red range. These high points are where photosynthesis is most effective, which coincides where the most oxygen is. A very good experiment. Today, if anybody did it, it would win a science fair, I think. But science fairs have kind of fallen off. And I used to be a coach of the Science Olympiad, which is an alternative. That's another story. Now, this is, okay, the previous two slides were action spectrum. This is an absorption spectrum. Combining action and absorption spectra are ways that help us to validate what we think is true, that the blue and red wavelengths are the major ones. Now here's a light bulb with with a prism with breaking up into the visible spectrum. We stick a leaf in between the prism and the source, whether it be artificial light or sunlight. It's the same answer. A little better with sunlight though. put a leaf in between the light source and the prism, and notice that uh, what you get over here is that the blue and the red have been absorbed, and you get this graying out effect in the red and green and blue areas. These other wavelengths are transmitted or reflected. In fact, the question I asked a moment ago was, why are plants green? Well, they're green because they don't absorb green. They reflect it and transmit it to you in your eyes. So you see what the plant doesn't absorb, okay? And that's why things are the way they are. I never will forget when teacher was teaching this, and I was a little 5-year-old, I guess, and said, put your hand on the white car, put your hand on the black car, and in the summer you couldn't put your hand on the black car because it absorbed all that heat, and white reflected so much, reflected almost everything. That's why it was white. Now, in other words, you see predominantly green, which is what the plants don't absorb much of. Any questions? All right. I hope everybody's enjoying this, despite the fact that it's not your typical plant identification type stuff, which everybody, including me, loves. But now, all right, that's what I just said. All right, now, photosynthesis of water and carbon dioxide. Let me catch up on the slides here. Okay. Now at A, where's A there, where water, although water is abundant, a lot of it is lost. In fact, in order to for plants to use the water, they have to lose 90% of the water they uptake, with the 10% being all they get to do these activities they need to do. So it's plants lose more water than they retain to do living processes. These guard cells are wide open, and they're turgid, Turgid, and that enables them, the carbon dioxide uptake is very high when they're open, because this is where the stomata, which is made up of the stomatal apparatus, is made up of the guard cells and some subsidiary cells. These guard cells are like sausages with an inner wall different thickness than the outer wall, and it's really ingenious in the way they've evolved. But they swell up, and the pore is large, and there's a high carbon dioxide uptake and a high water loss. So in order to get the carbon dioxide in, you gotta lose water. That's the catch-22. When water is scarce during, not necessarily drought, but at night when the guard cells close, because they don't have any photosynthesis to make them do photosynthesis and take on water, they become flaccid, the opposite of turgid, and they close or nearly close, and the somatophore is small, and the carbon dioxide uptake is very low, and they lose very little water at night. Now, bottom line here is that it is a bit of a juggling act. To get the right proportion of carbon dioxide and water, the raw material for photosynthesis, present simultaneously, it's a hard thing to do. Now, this regular photosynthesis is called C3 photosynthesis, because carbon is initially fixed as a 3-carbon compound, like a pyruvic acid molecule, 3-carbon. But there are plants that do another kind of photosynthesis called C4, and then there's crassulacean acid metabolism. If you Google CAM, I think you'd probably get it. But in a real physiology, plant physiology class, we would spend more time than you wanted to know about these two alternative processes. Crassulacean acid, well, first of all, C4. That kind of activity goes on in desert. Actually, this CAM is more a desert. C4 is more, you see, more in tropical grasses and some succulents, but a lot of succulents do this. In fact, the Crassulaceae is the stonecrop family. The jade plant includes jade plant succulents, and they have an alternative way of doing photosynthesis during dry times, which is dry habitats that they live in. C4 is photosynthesis more associated with tropical grasses. And carbon is first fixed as a 4-carbon compound called oxaloacetic acid instead of C3, and it's more efficient that way, especially in the tropical environment where competition for nutrients and resources is great. Now, all right, any questions about photosynthesis before we transfer over to respiration? All right, either I'm doing really well or y'all are asleep. Oh, I was telling a bad joke about, all right, this guy hated me anyway because I was a biology major that had to take this nutrition class or whatever he was teaching, and he was a physical ed teacher, and the question was true or false, respiration is breathing, and I said false because I knew it was more than breathing, it was biological oxidation. And anyway, I lost that battle because he was what he was, a bully. But anyway, biological oxidation, biological burning, controlled cellular burning. Anyway, when you burn anything, you need oxygen, and that's what's going on here. This is a monosaccharide glucose, and you're burning it with oxygen. Ironically, when you start burning it, though, you break it down into three carbon compounds. You do it without oxygen. You do it anaerobically in a process that we won't talk much anymore about called glycolysis, Glycolysis, which is something you talk about in a physiology class, not as much in a general botany class. But anyway, it's a catabolic process. It's a burning process. Now, what's missing from this? What's missing? What's missing is ATP, because when you burn the stable form of energy stored in that, you get a volatile form of energy of adenosine, ADENOSINE triphosphate, a high energy phosphate molecule. It's really like a stick of dynamite inside of a cell. And of course, heat energy is part of the waste that you get associated with it too. Now, all right, missing reaction. I've turned the reaction, or all I've done here is turn it around in conventional form. I put it up here in reverse form to show you it's the opposite sort of photosynthesis. Take chlorophyll and sunlight out of the picture, but basically it's the opposite direction of photosynthesis. Turn the arrow the other way and it's photosynthesis. Put in chlorophyll and oxygen. But down here, this is the more balanced equation about what respiration looks like. Glucose in the presence of oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water and the energy that was missing from the earlier reaction. Okay, let's see what else. Now, okay, name two sources for glucose. Well, photosynthesis is one, and the other is when you take, you get glucose from starch. You do a process called hydrolysis, where you have starch molecules, nothing but a bunch of these molecules end to end to end, plus glucose, plus glucose. And so if you stick water molecules in between the junction of where this joins another one, you have hydrolysis. So another source for glucose besides photosynthesis is a catabolic process called hydrolysis. If you're running out of glucose from photosynthesis at night, and you could, then you better start getting glucose from somewhere else, and that's where you get it from starch or animal starch. In the case of humans, it's called glycogen. Okay, now where does the oxygen come from? Obviously from photosynthesis. So cellular respiration, or derivative of it, is carried out by all living things. Photosynthesis is carried out by algae and green plants. Now, this th- this has to do with the fates of the products of photosynthesis. CH2O is just shorthand for glucose. It's a 1:2 to 1 ratio of C6H12O6. So just put that in your pipe and smoke it. That's what it is. Glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water chemical when you do when you burn sugar. Now, 25% of the products of photosynthesis go to respiration. Half of it goes to assimilation, and 25% is accumulation of starch and cellulose and other polymers, other big compounds. Okay, so now this guy was a teacher I had back in the 70s. All right. I think we pretty well dealt with that. Okay, why is warm climate not suitable to grow Irish potatoes? Well, that's getting into the next slide. Now, in this is shows what's called the where is it? The compensation point. That's the whole purpose of the slide. It exists here for 100% photo sunlight, and for 4% sunlight, the compensation point's here. It's the point where you burn by respiration everything you make in photosynthesis. That's what the compensation point is. Now, back to this previous slide, why is a warm climate not suitable? Irish potatoes, because they would burn the potato, the tuber, which is a modified stem, would never get very big because it would be burning up everything it made and not the overage. The overage is what makes the Irish potato that we eat. So this is really a light compensation point, though, because the photosynthesis can be divided up into a light phase and a dark phase. The dark phase is temperature dependent. The light phase is light dependent. Okay. All right. Interestingly, when you the transport of sugar from the leaf, not photosynthesis, limits plant yields. So that the actual ultimate limit of the yield has to do with the transport of sugar from the leaf in the form of sucrose. Putting two glucoses together would make sucrose, and that's how sugar is translocated. Despite this, though, what I'm trying to say is the ultimate limit of the plant yield has to do with getting that sugar out of the leaf. Now, acquiring nutrients, let's see, resources and moving them through the plants. All right. The goal, and I said a moment ago that plants lose 90% of the water to get the 10% they need to do business. The goal is to maximize light, water, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and sunlight available to plants while minimizing plant pest damage. And that's what's going on here, trying to show you that that's another part of the variable in the equation. One way to do this is to make bitter waste products. Now, plants don't have an excretory system, so that's after a while. An old leaf is a bit bitter compared to a young leaf. In fact, it reminds me of the plant called sweet leaf or horse sugar. I don't think it's down there in South Florida, John, or I don't know about Amy with Mobile, but I think Amy is gone. No, maybe Amy's with us. Let's see. Yeah, Amy's,
I'm here.
Okay. Well, I can only see part of you without flipping that thing. But anyhow, okay. Anyhow, I'm not sure you have horse sugar, but horse sugar is said to be sweet leaf, another common name. But if you taste an old leaf, it ain't sweet. It's bitter, and that's probably has a lot to do with the garbage builds up over time in a leaf, and because they don't have an excretory system. But anyway, this is a juggling act, acquiring nutrients and resources and moving them through the plant. It's quite we won't get into moving them through the plant much this time. Now, resource nutrition, this is the part that potentially is boring, and so we'll see how far we can go. It may not be boring to some of you. I don't know. It depends on how well I do. Plants can be classified according to nutritional type, or all living things can be for that matter. But plants, when we look at where they get the energy, we label them phototrophs. Label them phototrophs. When we classify them according to where they get the carbon from, they're called autotrophs. Okay. Now let's see. When we classify them according to the energy source, they're phototrophs. But what are you? You're considered a chemotroph when it comes to your energy, because you get your energy for consuming, your consumer, the glucose molecule. So you're considered a chemotroph. Now, in terms of the carbon source, plants get their carbon from carbon dioxide, an inorganic compound, but you get your carbon from the same molecule you get the energy from, the glucose molecule. So you're considered with that a a heterotroph. Now, next slide, we'll combine those terms. Here we are, photoautotrophs and chemoheterotrophs. But for now, these two little bullets are pretty important. Now, in fact, that bolded word is the same bolded word that you appear there, because we're more interested in plants and animals at this point. So when we combine the two, where you get the carbon and where you get the energy, we have the compound word photoautotrophs, where you get your energy and where you get your carbon. Photo, carbon dioxide, troph. Troph is the word is from the Greek word for nutrition. Now, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are considered the primary elements. They're found in the air, in the atmosphere and water, and the hydrosphere, okay, on Earth. And you have a lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. The lithosphere, LITH, is the Earth's crust. Nitrogen, ironically, is like 79% of the air and in the water. Well, 79% of the air, but it's also in the water. But plants do not take up nitrogen as N2, as gaseous nitrogen. They uptake it as nitrates, we'll talk about in a minute, and ammonia. Other elements come out of the lithosphere, and these are calcium, iron, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sodium, and sulfur. And there's a few more we'll get to. But now feeding plants is a misnomer that people use. It's really a mineral supplement. And we'll talk more about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in a minute, because they're in the soil. Actually, you say, well, you just said nitrogen was in the atmosphere, but to get it into a plant, you've got to bring it in the soil in the form of nitrate or ammonium. And nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, in that order, are the limiting factors about getting these in the soil. Usually the problem when the plant has a problem is not in the soil, it's nitrogen. Next most worst problem is phosphorus, and the last problem is potassium in terms of the soil interaction with the plant. So NPK, which one of these favors, does anybody know which one favors flowering? It's this one, phosphorus, okay? Nitrogen favors the overall growth of the plant, and if you don't have enough, your plant looks anemic the same way it does with magnesium deficiency. But potassium is more functional in terms of photosynthesis and respiration as a cofactor for enzymes. All right, this slide is more of a slide that I would use in microbiology, because all part of it would be relevant for microbes. There are some microbes like blue-green algae fit in this category, and which are bacteria. And then other bacteria are chemoautotrophs, and other bacteria are photoheterotrophs. And then there are even some that are in the chemoheterotroph category. But the most interesting to us are this upper left and bottom right, because the upper left is green plants, bottom right is you and most animals. Now, some animals are anaerobic. My dog got Giardia the other day, and that's an example of a protozoan that goes anaerobic. And its cousin, Trichomonas vaginalis, which causes one kind of STD, is another one. They're animals that go anaerobic with it. They can metabolize without oxygen for a while, or maybe exclusively. I don't know for sure. Of course, then fungi and which are yeast and bacteria can do fermentation processes, and the energy in their byproduct as ethanol can be shown by striking a match to ethanol. it'll really light up. But anyhow, now it's probably useful to think of these words in parentheses here, because that's where photoautotrophs comes from. This slide again is the same idea. It's looking at the sources of energy for a plant and the carbon source. When we look at energy, we have photo light. That's where that comes from. And for humans or animals, it's the glucose molecule. And when we look at where you get your carbon from, guess what? That same glucose molecule is responsible for your energy, is responsible for your source of carbon. Glucose molecule has two things about it that make it important. One is the energy, and one is the organic the glucose molecule. Now, in plants, of course, they're called autotrophs because that's where they get their carbon dioxide. Notice that carbon dioxide is an inorganic source, whereas down here we're dealing with an organic source. Glucose is an organic molecule. Technically speaking, carbon dioxide is an inorganic molecule. Okay. All right. Questions. This is pretty heavy duty in a way, but now this is a breakdown of the chemical composition of a corn plant. Now, I got a little mnemonic down here that I'm going to talk about called C. Hopkins Cafe Sodium Chloride Mighty Good. But all right, and I've got it here. But there's a caveat right here. All right, I. Did anybody know the periodic table well enough to tell me what I is? Iodine. It's iodine. And iodine is not used by plants. It's used by you and other animals, a lot of other animals. So you can still say C. Hopkins Cafe Sodium Chloride Mighty Good and leave out the slur the iodine. Now, there's a discrepancy between this mnemonic. That's what it is. And these are macronutrients, and macronutrients we're going to point out in a minute, and might as well point out now, are elements that are needed in large amounts, which is why they're in percentages. The macronutrients with the mnemonic MOB comes in and add cobalt. They're trace elements, and they are present in such small amounts. By the way, these arrows aren't in your slide, and I've added them yesterday, but both these arrows. And but this arrow is the trace elements in this table, and they're not really shown. That's why I put them down here. They're present in such small amounts. They're in the form of parts per million, whereas the macronutrients that are needed in large amounts are given as percentages. Iron can be, even though that's a relatively small amount, it's still considered that. Now, two discrepancies between this mnemonic and this table. First is silicon. Silicon is not here. Humans don't really need silicon, but some plants do. Grasses and rice in particular. Rice has up to 16% of its composition in the form of silicon. And silicon dioxide is sand, people, and horsetails are another good example. They are abrasive because they have so much sand in them. So some plants, in particular, not so much dicots, but monocots and horsetails, would have a high silicon content. And so, but it's not in this acronym, mainly because that acronym is more general, referring to all life, and including animals. That's why. The other discrepancy I already said is iodine. You don't see iodine here because iodine is not something plants need. Okay, let's see. Now, when you have the fifth, or when you add boron, it's not here, the boron, that there's 6 trace elements. But the acronym is, the mnemonic is Bob comes in. Now I'll go up and let's go back to this one just to help you out a little bit. All right. C. Hopkins Cafe food tastes mighty good with sodium chloride. So that's just a way that I hate memorization. So these mnemonics are useful for that. Now, this slide is a bit of a misnomer because instead of indicating the, it says it's the principal inorganic reservoirs of elements, it's actually not only a reservoir, it's also the source. So I've retitled the slide a little bit. There's 3 major sources of inorganic components or nutrients in plants. You have the lithosphere for the macronutrients. The trace elements or micronutrients come out of the lithosphere too, primarily. And then we have the hydrosphere and the atmosphere, where carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are considered. So sometimes people don't consider nitrogen a primary element. CH and O are considered primary elements because they make up to 95% of the plant. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen that come from the atmosphere make up 95% of the plant. Now in bacteriology, they make up only 78% of E. coli. But what I didn't say on this slide here is that the majority of everything, as you know, is water. Every living thing is more water than anything else. Okay. Now, so this slide is trying to tell you that not the source and the reservoirs for these inorganic elements that we're talking about are the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere. All right. And let's see okay. The oxygen, though, the real source is photosynthesis. It just resides in the air in the form of O2. And I said what would happen if we removed the green plants that make it and the algae. Excuse me. Now, before we leave this slide, it's ironic that 79% of the atmosphere is nitrogen, but the plant doesn't take it up that way. I already told you NPK and fertilizer, is reflecting the fact that it's in the soil. And in order to take up nitrogen, we'll have nitrogen fixing bacteria that we're going to talk about. And so nitrates and ammonium hydroxide are the ionic form of ammonia are the way plants get it. And so I think some of nitrites get fixed to nitrates, and the bacteria do that, some of them. Lightning can get involved, but we won't go into that. That's a small amount. All right, and magnesium to a plant is like iron to you. Iron is the hub of a hemoglobin molecule of a tetrapyrrole type molecule. And the magnesium is the hub of a chlorophyll molecule, which is also a tetrapyrrole. So if you're deficient in magnesium, you're going to be anemic when it comes to plant. Nitrogen can make you look anemic, and so can magnesium if you're deficient in that. Now, we already got into a little bit of this already. Nutrients can be categorized or classified according to where their carbon content or the amount that they're required in. And if we look at the carbon content, carbon, hydrogen, are usually the product of a living thing. Okay. And inorganic nutrients are atoms or combinations of atoms other than carbon and hydrogen. And they can also be classified according to whether they're needed in large amounts or needed in small amounts. That's where you have your primary elements and the others in the C. Hopkins Cafe, or you have the mob comes in trace elements, which are often catalysts. And catalysts are things by definition that are needed in small amounts. And we said that macronutrients are classified or categorized on percentages, and these are parts per million. Now, examples of inorganic elements are carbon dioxide, or in elemental form, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and the mineral elements from the lithosphere. Now, all right, so we're getting, this is the last of the busy slides. This is just a summary of everything we've talked about already, pretty much. And I've got the two mnemonics, excuse me, which are kind of acronyms, I guess, back. But it's a mnemonic is a trick for remembering something. And C. Hopkins Cafe, sodium chloride, mighty good, with the iodine exception and the lack of silicon not present in all plants, as being. Scientists have continued to investigate how necessary silicon was in plants. And again, it usually comes down to monocots, especially grasses, and rice is a good example. All right, so all right, this iron can go, it's on the borderline in terms of being a macronutrient, but it's a very, or whether it's a micro or macronutrient. Some would put it in the micro category, some would put it in the macro category. So, all right, now, all right, Donna liked this slide, and I do too, because this is, well, it's interesting because this is what's going on in the Amazon forest right now. If people like that dumb butt president they've got down there, he's worse than Trump was, I think. I hate to get political, but he is, and he's ignorant, and he doesn't know or care anything about science. And when you remove the soil from when you remove the plants to grow crops in a tropical forest, you're taking the majority of the nutrients with you, because in a tropical rainforest, except for, well, actually, yeah, here's one of the worst. Phosphorus is mostly in the plants, and here it's at least half almost is in the plants and the soil, and a third is in the vegetation. So when you burn the tropical vegetation, you don't have many nutrients left in the soil. So you might get a good year, maybe 1, 2, 3, and then the soil is depleted, so they move on to somewhere else. So the tropical soils may be a greenhouse when it comes to plants, but the soils are really aluminum and iron oxides and very poor to grow. So it's the other things, the humidity and the warm temperatures that make, in the sunlight, that make it so favorable to get a lush tropical vegetation. Now, change to the breadbasket of the world, North America, for example, in Minnesota, Iowa, and the Midwest, where you have this huge buildup of organic material in the soil, where most of the nutrients are locked up where? In the soil, not in the plants. And every year, part of it has to do with the temperate climate versus the tropical climate. So, and this has to do with the Midwest is where digging through that soil, they developed a steel plow. And there's a lot of controversy about John Deere doing it, or a guy named Major Andrus, Andrus. But either way, the steel plow had to be developed to get through that prairie sod, because I have a house in Chicago, and that soil is so rich. This soil here is poorer than Southwest Georgia. Southeast Georgia is known for the sandy, poor soil. Southwest Georgia is a little better, the intercoastal plain. We're in the outer coast plain here. But anyway, here there's a lot of turnover in the soil. In the temperate zone further north in Chicago and in the Midwest, other parts of the Midwest, the soil organic matter builds up every year because it turns cold and that organic matter doesn't break out. So every year you get a net increase in organic matter buildup. So it's very rich in nutrients. So no wonder it's the breadbasket of the world, the temperate zone. Okay, now this slide here, we're nearly done. So hang on tight. We're for today. Anyway, this slide shows the relationship of soil pH and availability to the plant. And that you can see that 6 to 7 is sort of a happy medium. And people forget it, but the pH scale is logarithmic. In other words, the negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration is what pH is. pH of 4 is 10 times more acidic than 5, 100 times more acidic than 6, and 1,000 times more acidic than 7, which is considered neutral. So you can kill somebody when you screw around with pH. You got to be careful. So it's just factor of 1. No, when you go from 6 to 7, it's a factor of 10. Keep that in mind, not just in plants. Now, all right, this is getting okay. These, all right, NPK, I mentioned it a moment ago. Obviously, this plant would be a control plant, a healthy plant. And NPK, and that, let's see, N, nitrogen, PK is the order that the phosphate, the fertilizers are sold. And we nitrogen deficient, you can, if you're nitrogen deficient, you tend to be chlorotic or achlorotic along the midrib. When you're potassium deficient, you're achlorotic around the margins, and both achlorotic in the apex. In phosphate, you get these pretty purple colors, and then of course that's the healthy plant. But now magnesium deficiency is not shown here, but the leaves would look pretty much anemic all over. Now this is in plant physiology as opposed to general botany. We would do these withholding experiments. Number 6 is a control, and every good science experiment has only one variable at a time. So this plant has everything it needs, all of the major components and the micro trace elements, the macronutrients and the micronutrients, and it's a healthy looking plant. And then these are deficient in any one of the 13 or so, up to 16 different, if you do them all, deficient in nitrogen or phosphorus, or and that's a good science experiment, one variable at a time. Now this is one of the actual bottles of nitrogen deficiency, showing one of them. This is like the control plant. This one is deficient in calcium. And so withholding one at a time is how we do it. All right, now we're going to let's see what is here. Technically, and this is, you might want to jot this down, you may not, but the term essential means in plant physiology that 3 things. Number 1, a deficiency in an essential element. In order to be a real essential element, a deficiency in that element prevents completion of the life cycle. That's one criterion. Another definition that physiologists have come up with is essential element cannot be replaced by a similar element. In other words, sodium can't replace potassium. And lastly, to be qualified to be an essential element, the element must, and this is the hardest one to experimentally validate, the element must be directly involved in the metabolism of the organism. In short, an essential element is an element or nutrient that a plant cannot live without. And this withholding experiment is a way of going about validating that. And you can imagine trying to do this with silicon, because that was the one that they study a lot and found out that monocots need it more than dicots, and primarily the grasses. And now this leguminous plants have inside of them a bacterium in their roots and nodules of most, if not all, I don't know how many, of 14,000 species of legumes, but living in the roots, they have a genus of bacterium called Rhizobium. And these nodules are where it lives in like peanuts and other plants. And there's a bacterial cell there showing you it's a rod-shaped cell. Cross section looks like a coccus, but longitudinally is what it's this. Now, if and there's the bacterium interfacing with the plant root hair. Now, here's what an experiment looks like with soybeans. They look anemic. All right, they're deficient in nitrogen, and over here we got healthy soybeans with rhizobium living in there. And you know, one thing about insectivorous plants, that they don't feed that much on animals, but they get their nitrogen from, it's kind of supplemental way to get nitrogen. When a lot of pitcher plants, not all of them, I mean not a lot, all pitcher plants, sundews and other insectivorous plants don't have rhizobium, but they get their nitrogen, which is the most limiting soil element there is. They can live in nitrogen poor soils because they supplement their nitrogen with insect exoskeletons that are rich in chitin, chitin. Okay, that's it, folks.